Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Tonight, beyond Mitt Romney's JFK moment, a telephoto shot of faith and politics in post-Bush America. Locally, we'll look at the last underpriced real estate in New York, the metered parking spot. Also, 40 years later, multimedia lets you see and feel the Newark Riots.
Jeff Martin here with the news. It is Thursday, July 13th, 9 a.m. Bands of Negroes went through a heavily Negro neighborhood in South Newark last night and early today, setting fires, smashing windows, and looting stores.
Has anything changed besides the lingo? We'll find out. But first, here are this week's online video picks. Impressed by the comeback of the NASDAQ? Well, watch pick number 1, created by the San Francisco a cappella group, the Richter Scales.
There's absolutely no bubble in technology.
Got me a CS degree on a roll. MIT moved to Palo Alto, opportunity now. Thought I had the perfect plan. Took the job at Webvan. Traded in my 20s for a worthless pile of tech stock. Suffered through the market crash. Lost a giant wad of cash. Pink slips, burger flips. Would you like some fries? Happy days are here again. Larry Page, Sergey Brin. Time to write a business plan so I can be like those guys. Here comes another bubble. It's a monster rally all around the valley. First you need a buzzword, then a second and a third. Pick at least 2 industries to revolutionize. Find yourself an engineer, feeding pizza, buying beer. Give them just a fraction of the pie. Need a good domain name, must be cheap, can't be lame. Something cool like Flickr, Mevo, Wiki, Mahalo, Vivo. Telephone without the T, big book with the triple G. Make your elevator pitch, cut it up and flip the switch. Here comes another bubble. LBCs are backing, maybe lands with fracking. Blog, clog it all, blog it if it's big or small. Blog if the Cineplex, blog while you're having sex. Blog in the locker room, baby's blogging in the womb. Blog even if you're wrong, won't you blog about this song?
Well, maybe blogging is second nature to you, but some people don't even know what a blog is. Nothing to be ashamed of. Fortunately, the Tides Foundation and Free Range Studios have produced a blog primer. It's our video pick number 2.
Blogs are websites that are organized by blog posts. These are individual news stories, like articles in the paper. Bloggers simply fill out a form like this one to post a news story. With the click of a button, the blog post appears at the top of the web page, just above yesterday's news. Over time, the blog becomes a collection of these posts, all archived for easy reference. Also, each blog post can become a discussion through comments left by readers. Blogs make the news a two-way street. But really, the fuss is not about how blogs work. It's about what people like you do with them that matters. Let's say you have a blog about green living and outdoor photography. It reflects your unique perspective. This helps you build relationships with your readers and other bloggers with similar interests. Speaking of relationships, bloggers often work together. In addition to comments, you'll read each other's posts, quote each other, and link your blogs together. This creates communities of bloggers that inspire and motivate each other. Whether it's their ease of use or the opportunities they offer, blogs have been adopted in a very big way. Since 2003, there have been over 70 million blogs created, each with its own version of news. So the big deal about blogs is that they gave people like you the power of the media and created a personal kind of news that appeals to a high number of small audiences.
Now you are ready to go forth and blog. Just don't forget to go outside once in a while. Video pick number 3, the Why Tuesday campaign, pops that question on John McCain's Straight Talk Express.
Hey, Senator. You got 1 second on the way out? Sure. One of the questions that you didn't get a chance to talk about tonight was the state of the voting system here in America. Yeah. And you know the stats better than anyone else. 139th out of 172 countries in voter participation. Yeah. What do you think about that? Do you have a plan for election reform you're putting forward?
Well, I think it's too bad that we have such lower voter turnout, and I'd be glad to do anything to stimulate increased participation. But probably one of the ways is for us to conduct campaigns that motivate people to vote rather than all of negative campaigns which make people say, I'm not going to be involved in it. I would really think that's part of the disillusionment which you're seeing in increased independent voter registration.
What about, you got clean elections in Arizona. You want to see that on a national level?
You
Public
mean
financing?
No, I don't think that that's what we want to do. I think that we ought to let the BICRA see how it plays out first, but I'm very worried about the 527s.
And national holiday voting, final question?
Whatever gets people out, but I'm not sure that people wouldn't just go fishing or on vacation. There's mixed opinions about that.
Thanks very much.
Good to see you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Senator.
Hey, even Russians get to vote on the weekend for Putin. Now, pick number 4, a guy who clearly has had it being treated like a stranger and a danger in his own land.
Hi. I'm not a terrorist or a date merchant. I don't live in a tent or keep my wife zipped up in it all day. And for the record, I knew who she was before I married her, too. I have more than just white robes and sandals in my closet, and I've never actually rode a camel before, ever, even though I'm sure they're great animals and all. I do know someone named Ahmed, but it's not the guy from your economics class, so stop asking. Falafel actually is not my favorite type of food. I don't know how to even tie a turban, and I've never worked at a gas station or driven a taxi cab. And I don't think you're an infidel either. I believe in peace. I believe in people of all different religions and beliefs living together in harmony like the early Islamic, Arab, Ottoman, and Spanish empires. And trust me, I would go back to my own country, but I'm already in it.
That video from the New Jersey chapter of the American Muslim Society. And web video pick number 5 is about an American who is not a Muslim, though some of his rivals would like you to think he is, and some of his fans would like to pretend he's Indian and a Bollywood movie star.
Tonight, there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
आजा 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 आ चोरी चोरी हम गोरी से प्यार करेंगे चुपके चुपके दिल की बातें यार करेंगे आने वाली कब आएगी कोई दे बता अरे ढूंढ रहे हैं जाने कब से हम उसका पता आजा 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 आजा
Barack Oballywood from Campaign, P-A-I-N, 2008. You know you're a rock star when they mash you up like that, right? And that's our online video picks for this week. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Talk about a political sea change. 40 years ago, JFK had to sound secular to get elected. Now Mitt Romney has to wear a cross on his sleeve just to stay in the running. Let's take a look at both.
Americans tire of those who would jettison their beliefs even to gain the world. There is one fundamental question about which I'm often asked. What do I believe about Jesus Christ? I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of mankind. My church's beliefs about Christ may not all be the same as those of other faiths. Each religion has its own unique doctrines and history. These are not bases for criticism, but rather a test of our tolerance. Religious tolerance would be a shallow principle indeed if it were reserved only for faiths with which we agree. There are some who would have a presidential candidate describe and explain his church's distinctive doctrines. To do so would enable the very religious test the founders prohibited in the Constitution. No candidate should become the spokesman for his faith, for if he becomes president, he will need the prayers of the people of all faiths.
But contrary to common newspaper usage, I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party's candidate for president. who happens also to be a Catholic. I do not speak for my church on public matters, and the church does not speak for me. Whatever issue may come before me as president, if I should be elected, on birth control, divorce, censorship, gambling, or any other subject, I will make my decision in accordance with these views, in accordance with what my conscience tells me to be in the national interest, and without regard to outside religious pressure or dictates. And no power or threat of punishment could cause me to decide otherwise. But if the time should ever come, and I do not concede any conflict to be remotely possible, when my office would require me to either violate my conscience or violate the national interest, then I would resign the office, and I hope any other conscientious public servant would do likewise.
Well, the political landscape sure has changed since JFK. Damon Linker thinks the country is headed backwards on the matter of religion and politics. He is the author of Theocons, Secular America Under Siege. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Kennedy and Romney, compare and contrast.
Well, it's actually very complicated. I mean, on the one hand, you had Kennedy, who very clearly tries to separate not just church and state, but politics and religion pretty much as absolutely as you can.
What's the difference? Church and state and politics and religion?
Well, church and state means basically an established church, which we've never had in this country. They have one in England. It's the Anglican Church, and it's at the head of government. In our country, we've never had that, although at the founding period, there were some states that had established churches. The First Amendment outlaws any federal established church, so that we've never had. The question about politics and religion, though, is a little more complicated because there are a lot of people of religious faith who believe in bringing their values and beliefs into the public square in order to get their political agenda enacted. And really what we've seen in the decades since Kennedy gave his speech is the rise of a political movement that actually seeks to increase the role of religion in politics. In Kennedy's time, there was no active kind of political movement, any kind of populist upsurge to try to accomplish that goal, and we now do have that with the religious right.
So Kennedy's message was pure, as we heard there, purely, I will not let my religion dictate to me what I do in office, in a civil office. Romney's message, even in that one little clip, was mixed.
Absolutely.
Half of it was the same as Kennedy's, right? Since he's a member of a religious minority, he wanted to assure the country that he was not going to let his religion dictate how he runs the country. At the same time, he wanted to make himself seem safe to that very active Christian political bloc who was looking for a Christian.
Right, exactly. I mean, what you had here is the Republican Party has been remarkably effective over the last couple of decades at trying to portray itself as America's religious party. And so that has politicized a lot of religious questions in this country. I mean, most of us, I think, would love it if you could run for president without having to answer questions about doctrines in your church and to have a candidate stand up and confess that he believes that Christ is the savior of mankind, as Romney said, is, I think, distasteful to a lot of Americans. But because religion is now such a big part of our scene, the political scene in the country, you now require that of certain candidates if they're if they're members of a religious minority.
Do you think politically Romney succeeded in walking that line?
I think he did, because there really were two speeches. I think he said enough to allay the fears of some people who are anti-Mormon in their prejudices. But I think more effective, actually, was his attempt to portray himself as a potential leader of the kind of interdenominational religious right. Much of the speech actually wasn't about Mormonism at all. It was a statement of how he believes that religion implies politics and freedom implies religion, and that faith is a foundation of our Constitution. That was the message I think he wanted to get out.
Was he getting that message out to evangelical Christian supporters of Mike Huckabee in Iowa, to be specific?
Well, he was trying to, yes. Now, some of those people, I think, will really never vote for Romney because he's a Mormon. But I think the overall sentiments by a lot of evangelicals was positive about the speech. I think they liked hearing those statements of kind of interdenominational Christian faith by Romney.
So let's see an example of just how far one would have to go to catch up with Mike Huckabee on this question. Here is an amazing interaction at Jerry Falwell's Liberty University between a Huckabee supporter and the candidate.
Recent polls show you surging in many states, including Iowa, where you're statistically tied with Mitt Romney, as well as Florida, where you're second place, and Texas. What do you attribute this surge to?
There's only one explanation for it, and it's not a human one. It's the same power that helped a little boy with 2 fish and 5 loaves feed a crowd of 5,000 people. And that's the only way that our campaign could be doing what it's doing. And I'm not being facetious, nor am I trying to be trite. There literally are thousands of people across this country who are praying that a little will become much, and it has, and it defies all explanation. It has confounded the pundits, and I'm enjoying every minute of their trying to figure it out. And until they look at it from a just experience beyond human, they'll never figure it out. And that's probably just as well. That's honestly why it's happening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Whoa, that was beyond religious. That was mystical. Beyond
Absolutely.
human.
Well, I mean, I think in that clip you really get a sense for what has happened to American culture and politics over the last couple of generations. That a man who's a serious candidate for the highest office in the land now makes a statement like that. Now, note that he didn't talk about Jesus Christ in particular. He didn't talk about anything uniquely evangelical when it came to theology. It was a kind of interdenominational statement of belief in American providence and God intervening in his personal campaign.
Right, that God is on his side.
Right, but precisely because it had no content that could polarize the difference, say, between a Methodist and an Episcopalian or a Lutheran, but just was a general statement of a kind of mere orthodoxy of Christianity that appeals to many millions of Americans who like to hear presidential candidates talk that way.
The title of your book is Theocons.
Mm-hmm.
Is Mike Huckabee a theocon?
I think he is, although he actually speaks less of the language than Romney does. I think in Romney's speech, he showed some evidence of having been to theocon tutorial in how to pitch these things.
What's a theocon? Who's a pure theocon?
Well, I think George W. Bush is as close as we'll get to a pure theocon.
Theological conservative, obviously.
Yes, much like a neoconservative is a new conservative. A theoconservative is someone who, in a nutshell, believes that regardless of how you feel about abortion or the other issues of the religious right, that really these issues that the religious right is fond of need to be couched in terms of America being a Christian nation, that America's metaphysical identity is at stake when we talk about religion and politics, so that if you're not a believing Christian, you're somehow also not a very good American citizen, that the two are equated to each other.
You know, I thought Romney in his speech was speaking over the heads of the theocons, the real Christian evangelicals who, I mean, let's face it, if they won't vote for him just because he's a Mormon, they may be a lost cause. They won't vote for a Jew if all they're looking for is a Christian, if that's really a litmus test to be elected. And maybe they know the theological differences with Mormonism are there, and they just won't vote for a Mormon. Maybe he was talking over their heads, past Iowa, to the general sort of moderate Christian electorate who he would have to woo in the general election.
Maybe, but I think if he was doing that, he would have had a much broader message, and he would have at least acknowledged the existence of secular Americans and agnostic Americans, even atheist Americans, and he didn't do that. And I think the reason is, I mean, really in America over the last generation, you have seen theological differences among different groups disappearing, where conservatives in all different denominations see themselves as arrayed on one side of a cultural chasm with liberals and secularists on the other side. And Romney was portraying himself, I think, as the leader of the people on the religious side. And so differences between Mormons, other kinds of Christians, Catholics, that doesn't matter. What matters is that we're conservative Christians. And that was his message.
You were a Rudy Giuliani speechwriter for a time when he was mayor, and we'll get to that and where he fits into all of this. But did you hear the latest Huckabee news? This is just breaking today. There's going to be a New York Times Magazine article on Sunday in which he is quoted saying that Mormons believe that Jesus and the devil were brothers.
Yes, I did hear this. I think this is a very clever ploy on Huckabee's part to try to reverse what I was claiming Romney's strategy was in that speech last week, which was to elide the differences between Mormons and other Christians and say that they're all together on the same cultural side in the culture war. Huckabee is very cleverly trying to... No, I mean, some people say that about Mormons, but they're generally ill-informed. That's not true. I mean, it's true in one level because Mormons believe we're all children of God, including Jesus. So literally children. So if we're all children, then Lucifer and Christ and you and me are also brothers. I mean, we're all related in some way.
You have to take it on that level, on that broad level.
Well, that's the kernel of truth in the claim. But by bringing it up that way, that's Huckabee's, I think, a little slimy way of trying to remind people that Mormons are strange, that Romney might portray himself as being just like the rest of us, but he's different. He's a member of that cult, the Mormons.
Pretty dirty pool.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Mike Huckabee. So where does your old boss fit on this scale?
Well, I think his campaign, which I'm not supporting in any formal way, and I actually have my differences with him on various issues this time around, but I think his campaign is important precisely because he's not trying to woo the religious right, other than, trying to get any members of the religious right who feel so strongly about the war that they'll support him for that.
I know he's running mostly on the war and anti-terrorism, but he has promised to appoint strict constructionist judges, which is the same as saying judges who will ban Roe v. Wade, which is or overturn Roe v. Wade, which is the #1 religious Christian agenda item, I think. And did you see him on Tim Russert this week? Near the end of that, he was asked his position on gay rights, and he says, well, mine is informed by the Catholic Church, which means it's fine whatever your sexual orientation is. The sin is in the behavior.
Right.
That's pretty Christian conservative.
That is, but if you look at the quote, it's very muddled, and I think it's not at all clear what exactly he's trying to say in that statement. I know a lot of conservative Catholic commentators really hated that statement because it was so muddled. I think that really Giuliani is a liberal when it comes to social issues, and he's not trying to move consciously the Republican Party away from its pro-life position. He's just trying to muddy the waters enough so that some religious right voters will vote for him.
What do you think the theocons really want, ultimately? For example, when people diss the Islamist radicals from around the world, the Wahhabists, the Bin Ladenists, they say, well, look, one of the things that these people want is to establish a caliphate in many countries, Islamic law, an Islamist state. Is that what the theocons want in the United States, except a Christian state?
I don't think exactly. It's interesting because the theocons, in the way they understand America, they want America at a kind of surface level to remain very much the way it is, capitalist, a kind of business mentality, very aggressive in the world, fighting wars for the sake of democracy, all kinds of ways it would remain the same, except, and this is crucial, Americans would understand themselves, their country, and their principles as fundamentally allied with Christianity. And so really what they want, for instance, they want Roe v. Wade overturned, but they don't just want it overturned, they want the judges who do it and the Americans who hear the verdict to understand that of course it had to be overturned because a regime of abortion rights is inconsistent with the Christianity of our values.
So in our last minute, how close are they to that? And is their influence waning now at the end of the Bush administration when people say Rudy Giuliani is, nominatable in the Republican Party?
Well, I think their influence wanes and waxes over time. They reached their early high point under Reagan, especially with the '84 re-election of Reagan. They then went into a downturn with the election of Bill Clinton, and a lot of people predicted that they were on their way out. They then dogged him throughout his campaign, were behind a lot of the Monica Lewinsky business. And then they came back stronger, more intellectually formidable than ever under George W. Bush. And they might be in decline right now, but they'll be back. They're a part of our culture, and they're not going away.
Damon Linker, author of Theocons. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. This past summer marked the 40th anniversary of the riots in Newark that scorched the city, killing 17, injuring 700. There were various remembrances, a TV documentary too, but one artist and a filmmaker felt those didn't quite convey the full impact, especially not to young people who didn't live through it. So they created a multimedia exhibit called 5 Days in July, just installed at Algira, the Arts Center in Newark. Let's glimpse part of a split-screen video from that installation, then we'll come back to reflect on Black Power, then and now.
Of us that come up from the South, we figure that we're going to get a better deal up here. But when you come here, it's the same way. You still can't get anything better than housework, factory work, and stuff like that that's paying very little wages.
My house stays cold all the time. My room, it be just as cold, it's just like a refrigerator. You can leave a glass of water in my room and it'll freeze up overnight.
You talk to a lot of people, they don't want to live in a neighborhood like this, but they've been pushed around so long until they just feel that when a neighborhood run down like this, there's nothing they can do about it. The people downtown are going to do what they want anyway.
Anybody living in a poor neighborhood is wasted, period. If you see a bomb over there, you're going to stand next to it. But we're standing next to a bomb. As long as people are going to be standing next to that bomb, they're going to blow up with it.
That video, the full version is on YouTube, by the way, is from the art installation 5 Days in July about the Newark Riots in 1967. Again, it's at Algira, the Contemporary Art Center in Newark. Joining us now, Esther Podemski, the exhibit's co-producer, and to discuss Newark, Sarah Lawrence, college history professor, Kamosi Woodard, author of A Nation Within a Nation. That's a seminal work on Black Power. Welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
You are a scholar now. You were living in Newark in the 1960s, is that correct?
Oh, yes.
And where were you in July of 1967?
July riots were my graduation present. I just graduated from Weequahic High School.
What was your involvement?
Ironically, I was working for Prudential Life Insurance, downtown Newark, and when the mayor, Adnegio, came on and said that it was just a rumor, it wasn't a riot, both my father and I went to work that day. My father was blinded by the National Guard on the way to work, so he's never worked again. I went on the bus with a lot of other gullible people downtown to Newark, and when we got downtown, it was like Military Day Parade. The tanks were there. The bus driver started shaking. He stopped the bus. Ignorant, I just kept walking to work. I went to Prudential, and the security guard said, "You must be crazy, there's a war happening." And so I had to walk back through the riot to get home, and I went home and told my mother, "They're lying."
You weren't political before that, it sounds like.
We were political, but we didn't know all of that was going to happen.
Yeah. Esther will bring you in a minute, but at the installation, you can see the cab driver whose arrest sparked the whole 5-day insurrection. This is an amazing excerpt. Let's watch.
So I asked him what was the charges, and he told me that I popped the intersection. Well, this is impossible because it's a major thoroughfare, and the stop streets are running east or west. He started writing the ticket, so I thought it was impossible to reason with him. So, I figured he was going to write the ticket. So what is that, $5? So I said, well, do what you want to do. And this evidently incensed him. He jumped out of the car, told me to get out of the car, told the passenger to get another cab because I was under arrest. So he started to the station. So then he started punching me in the car. And his partner told him to, don't let out on him. So that's another slang expression I assume means take it easy. He said, don't let out on him, and he said, well, now, I said, this baby is mine.
Esther, why an installation and not just a film?
Well, often what happens in documentary films is that you have interviews with people who reflect back 40 years later, and in the interim of reflection, they've become, they've adjusted, and they've had this period of time, and their attitudes have evolved. Whereas staying within the moment of the riot was an attempt by both Chuck Schultz, who is my collaborating partner, and me to think about having people really experience the event as if they were in that moment, and also not to depend on your living room couch and the remote and that kind of diversion, but to actually experience the installation in a public space and together.
So how does that work? How do people experience this installation?
Well, it's a two-screen in a corner of a room.
And both excerpts that we've seen so far have a split-screen technique.
No, it's one screen, and then there's another screen, and it's directed in the corner of the room, and it's larger than life. So it's a large projection. And in some ways, the installation looks a little bit like a book. And so when you have the interaction of, for instance, troops marching, and the kind of sometimes flows from one screen to another. So there's a certain vantage point we wanted people to see the work.
You're there, you're standing up, the lights are on, you're interacting with the people around you, making eye contact. Lights are low?
The lights are off.
Lights are off.
So you're in a dark room, but you're standing in between, or you're sitting in between the screen. So the attempt was to have the sensation of experiencing the riot, to be in the riot.
Scary.
Well, at times, yeah, probably, yeah.
And also to promote conversation among the people there?
I don't think conversation at the moment. You know, we hope people will just be interacting with the projections, but to have a dialogue afterwards. And also, there are so many people who never heard of the riots. You know, they didn't know that there were 160 insurrections in the late 60s.
That's the key, Kamosi, isn't it? I mean, is it important for people today who didn't live through the riots to learn about them? Newark is such a different place. Why do they need to know what happened in 1967?
Well, you know, we went from an urban crisis in the 1960s to an urban catastrophe today. So how do we get there? That's important to know. And much of these cities, from New Orleans to Detroit to Newark, you're looking at the ruins of a war, a battlefield. And if you don't know what the battle was about, the sad thing is there are school teachers I've met who are teaching our kids right now who said they didn't know there was a riot in Newark in 1967. And so the kids have no chance of knowing, so you don't even understand why you're walking through all these casualties.
And in the audio documentary that accompanies the video, the mayor of Newark at the time says, Newark is over, done, finished. Newark is only now, people say, starting to come back, although maybe it came back under Mayor James in a number of ways. But that must have been something, to live in a city that the mayor himself called done, over, finished.
Well, I'm from the Central Ward of Newark, and when I went away to college that fall, when I came back, my neighborhood was abandoned, and that was urban renewal. Urban renewal wiped out my whole neighborhood, so I've never seen the people I went to high school with. And Mindy Fullilove has written a book called Root Shock, about the shock you have when your whole neighborhood is gone. So part of what one reason you had such a boost in the civil rights movement after the '67 uprising was it was a coming together of residents who hadn't seen each other, and the place that they could get together ended up being the civil rights movement, ironically. So.
And Esther, the Newark, the whole Newark experience became a magnet for young militant organizers, including whites like Tom Hayden.
Yes, and also Tom Hayden is, very well known among the people who were, who had come to Newark prior to the riots. But there were other people, and Norm Fruchter and Bob Mackover. Bob Mackover is a very wonderful filmmaker, and they made a number of films that they were members of STS, as Camozzi was, and they were.
That's for people who don't know. That's the radical group of the 1960s, Students for a Democratic Society.
Right, and they made these films that were used for organizing troublemakers, and Troublemakers is really a film about failure, the organizational failure to for people to change the housing laws and to voting representation. But also, Mackover made a number of other films, like he documented the Poor People's Conference, which was about organizing. There's this wonderful footage, it's all on film, and You've Got to Live Here, and which is a document about the Central Ward right before the riots.
And a lot of your footage, at least some of it, comes from the SDS, which means they were very much ahead of their time in doing media about protest, about social issues as they were protesting them.
And media with an opinion, you know. But then also we used news footage. And what was interesting about the news footage that we used was the fact that we have interviews with people that were never broadcast. John Smith was never broadcast. We found
the cab driver, John Smith, who we just saw.
Right.
In fact, let's look at another very dramatic and disturbing moment from the 5 Days in July installation.
A small segment of the community was mad. Now the entire segment of the community is mad because I'm mad and I'm not a looter. The only reason why I didn't steal nothing because I didn't need a damn thing. If it was the fact that I wasn't working and didn't have a job, I would have been looting too.
Where there are snipers in buildings, the police and the military forces in the city have just been laying down barrages. These shots are going into all apartments where people are only trying to stay out of trouble and mind their own business. This has to be stopped. These people are supposed to be trained in marksmanship. If it takes 15, 20, 80 people to shoot into a building to get one sniper, then I would say let the sniper shoot.
That is unbelievable for people who didn't live through it. I never saw that before. It looked like that was a CBS correspondent of some kind, being anything but dispassionate, because she had that CBS eye on her microphone. That sniper, we now know, was a figment of somebody's imagination. It was really the cop's own bullets ricocheting.
Tens of thousands of bullets were shot. When I went away to college in Pennsylvania, some of the young Republicans from the suburbs of New Jersey, we'd have bull sessions, and they explained to me that leading up to the uprising that the school teachers were telling the young guys in the National Guard that the welfare mothers were responsible for their high taxes. And so he said there was no accident that they shot those women. And if you think about it, it's a very rare riot scene. You see many riots all over the world, and even in America, white riots, where you do not shoot into residences. You know, so it doesn't make any sense. You have a lot of, if you look at the Boston busing crisis, there were riots, but they didn't come in and shoot the residents in their homes.
Why was Newark different?
That's racism there. That's obviously
More racism than in Boston? Plenty of racism there.
Well, racism against the community is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
So they were able to restrain the white rioters in Boston without shooting into their homes, right? But they shot into the black people's homes.
Yeah, I hear
and obviously those mothers who were in the windows were not rioting. So that's really, that's really,
and
that's
clip,
close to ethnic cleansing.
I hear you. And that clip showed it so clearly with those bullets going up into homes. And maybe they were all a spray to try to get one alleged sniper where they didn't know where he was. Yes, but it's unbelievable. Who was that reporter?
I was just going to say that's Sally Carroll, and she wasn't really a reporter. She was one of the first African-American detectives to be part of the police department.
Really? She was a cop?
She's a cop, and she was speaking at a rally that was, occurred shortly after.
It looked like she had a CBS microphone.
Yeah, did it?
Yeah,
they were probably interviewing her.
But I talked to two kids who were on the rooftops of that Hayes Homes project, and it's amazing. They were standing up there, and one kid said to the other one, "What are they doing?" And they heard these bullets whizzing past their heads and said, "Oh my God, this is real." So that's how bad it was. You had kids who would usually be up on, and they were acting as if they were snipers. They were just kids like saying, where are these tanks coming up?
People then talked about the term black power.
Yeah.
We don't hear that phrase anymore. What was it, historically, different from any movement for empowerment today?
I think the big difference with black power from civil rights was the leadership was right in the community. And in many ways, SDS, Students for Democratic Society, located their offices in the community. The civil rights earlier leaders had located their offices in the suburbs.
The Martin Luther King style civil rights movement, you're making that distinction?
Now, King was in the community too, but in the North, many of the civil rights groups prior to this had located themselves. If you look at it in the 1950s, much black leadership lived in South Orange, New Jersey, and not Newark, New Jersey.
Right.
But this new leadership spoke much more militantly because they lived in these. Newark, similar to Brownsville, Brooklyn is a what you call a speculative ghetto. That means you don't have any good housing. It was never built to be good housing. It's not that the housing declined. There wasn't light, air, toilets in the beginning, right? When I was a kid, I had to use the public shower because we didn't have a bathtub in our apartment, right? That's how poor our housing was. So Newark had the worst health in 1890. So it's a chronically poor city. And that's why when you change the faces of people in high places, those chronic conditions never changed.
What was the terminology you used before? Newark was...
speculative ghetto.
Well, but Newark was what? A disaster in the 1960s? It's a catastrophe today?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is particularly from going to New Orleans and looking at that catastrophe and then reflecting on Detroit and these other cities and seeing the stark similarities.
Why aren't there the riots today that there were in the 1960s if there are still these entrenched pockets of hopelessness?
Well, my old professor, Michael Katz, who makes the contrast with what's going on in Paris now, where they are having uprisings, he argues that the rise of a police and prison state have a great deal to do. There's less democracy in those places now, with the big difference.
So many more cops per city, so many more people in prison per population.
That's his argument, yeah. And many of these neighborhoods have been wiped out. There's not that many people there anymore. The population of Newark is 1/2 or less than what it used to be.
So does this installation provide people any hope? Does it help empower Newark in some way for the future? Or does it just make people angry about the past?
It might, I don't know actually. It's hard to say. I think everyone has a different reaction. I think one of the reactions is that that it isn't purely didactic, and part of it I think comes from the fact that the people who are characters in the installation are ordinary people, and in that way they're kind of agents of history. They rise in importance, and they're contrasted to the white politicians that were in power that sort of couldn't face the cause and effect relationship between what caused the riots and their responsibility.
Willing to get political for our last 30 seconds, does the Cory Booker era represent an important new beginning for Newark?
I'm pretty ignorant on that, but I would say
you're up at Sarah Lawrence now.
Yeah,
upstate New York.
But I think the system in Newark is what the problem. Every mayor that we've had has been either imprisoned or indicted for the last nearly 50 years now. So I'm not on the individual. That's the individual, but it must be something very corrupt about that whole machinery.
Kamosi, Esther, thank you both very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, how feeding the meter more could find you a parking spot faster and maybe save the planet. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Ladies and gents, we're about to lay some CUNY TV on you. Get ready for City Talk, study with the best, Nueva York, and all the rest. Hey, like Canapé, and you'll want to stay for art or something like it. Hip hooray, urban agenda, yeah. Brian Lehrer Live. I italics for my paisanos on Channel 75. Whoa, swinging guys and swinging chicks. City Cinematheque has great foreign flicks. Lifelong learning for you and me. CUNY Television, it's diversity TV. Ring-a-ding-ding. Yeah.
Just put a quarter in the parking meter so that we could park on the park bench and relax and enjoy the day.
We're here on the parking day, and this is a parking spot. I've never sat in a parking spot before.
Oh yeah, they've got it cordoned off and they have nice benches and it's like a little cafe.
We're feeding the meters to make sure that we're in compliance like anybody who would be parking here would be. You could take up this whole space for about $125 a month, which I think is probably a lot cheaper than any other per square footage deal in Park Slope.
Thank you. Street Films, this is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. And here's an idea that's likely to be unpopular in New York. Charge more for parking on the street. That is the proposal of my next guest, Donald Shoup, author of The High Cost of Free Parking. He's here from L.A. to propose the idea with New York planners. Thanks so much for coming in. Make parking more expensive? It's the last thing you can get in New York for a quarter.
Well, let's start with the big problem. Every day, America's motor vehicles consume 1/8 of the world's total oil production, and we import more than half of that from abroad, and we pay for it with borrowed money. That's not a sustainable future. What's that got to do with free parking in Manhattan? That every day thousands of drivers circle the block time and time again hunting for a free curb space. And doing that, they waste fuel that's been imported, they pollute the air, they congest traffic, and even now they may be contributing to global warming. So I think if you connect it to the bigger problems, it doesn't seem so unreasonable to ask a New York driver to pay the fair market price for the car parking they're hunting for.
What would be the fair market price for parking in Manhattan?
Well, it would depend on the location and the time. And in some places it might be 50 cents an hour, other places it might be $3 an hour. I walked along West 47th Street between 5th and 6th Avenues today. That's called the Diamond District. All the parking is free. I don't think it's asking too much to ask a diamond merchant who's delivering a parcel of $1 million worth of diamonds to pay whatever it takes to create a few vacant spaces. I think that's
you're not saying charge the driver, you're saying charge the merchant who fronts the street.
Charge the driver who is parking, charge the user. It's a user charge. And I would say that the right price for curb parking anywhere is the lowest price you can charge and have 1 or 2 vacant spaces on the block so nobody will drive around hunting for a space.
But, you know, people will say that's a formula for locking poor and working class people out of the opportunity to drive and park in Manhattan, and it becomes a privilege for the rich. Are you concerned about that?
Nobody could say that about the Diamond District. I don't see why that's a justification for making parking free.
But the Diamond District attracts lots of ordinary New Yorkers who come there to buy their wedding rings.
I think that somebody who's coming to buy a diamond can pay for their parking rather than drive around for 20 minutes in the middle of Manhattan, congesting traffic, polluting the air, and maybe warming the globe. In any case, studies have shown that of the pedestrians on the sidewalk in downtown, only 2% of them arrived by car. So that it would be affecting a tiny percentage of the people on any street. But can I say what's made this idea popular elsewhere?
Please.
Where
is it popular?
Forget about global warming. Forget about air pollution.
You're an economist.
That's right. An urban planner at UCLA. That it isn't those big issues that create the political support for fair market prices for curb parking. It's when cities commit to spending the meter revenue on the very blocks where the money is paid. That in California, some cities charge these performance-based prices. By performance-based, I mean the price that yields about a 85% occupancy rate and 15% vacancy rate so that anybody can find a space. They dedicate that money to cleaning up the sidewalk, to historic street lights, street furniture, putting wires underground. So the vast majority of people benefit.
Where do they do that, for example?
They do it in, for example, Pasadena, one of the most popular destinations in Southern California now. It used to be a skid row, and the city wanted to put in meters. The merchant said, no way. It'll chase the few customers we have away. Finally, the city bought the meters, had to store them for 2 years while they argued, and the city said, all right, if we put in the meters, we'll spend all the meter money in Old Pasadena like that. The merchant said, that's different.
What do they charge there?
From going to total opposition, they said, let's run the meters till midnight. Let's run them on Sunday.
How much?
It's $1.25 an hour. And that $1.25 yields $1 million a year for a little 15-block district.
It doesn't seem like so much. Would that do it for the Diamond District?
Not the Diamond District, but many parts of Manhattan, I bet it would.
You come from California, which is, you know, Southern California, no less, L.A., sort of the car capital of the world. Pasadena is right by there, more or less, but it's a smaller city. Do they have anything like this in Los Angeles?
Well, the city council is now had recommended by the LA Department of Transportation, like your New York City Department of Transportation, to price all of the parking meters to yield an 85% occupancy rate.
You were in New York this week to participate in some events around various congestion issues. How'd that go?
I think it's been wonderful. Usually it's the enemies of the car who love this idea. And I did ask about you. They said that you were a bicyclist. Is that right?
That's correct.
And even some bus riders and bicyclists seem horrified at the idea of paying for parking. It's sort of like the Stockholm Syndrome. You become sympathetic to your captors, is that even if you're bicycling in congested traffic, you would hate the idea of charging in the Diamond District $5 an hour for parking. That you have to realize in Manhattan, it's one of the greatest walking cities, maybe the greatest walking city on earth, and yet all of the talk is about parking and traffic. This is a way to reduce traffic congestion, make parking a lot easier, and to raise money for sidewalk improvements. If New York City said, we will clean your sidewalks, we will give you street furniture, we'll give you curb extensions, we will make it a pedestrian paradise in your neighborhood. If you agree to this right-priced curb parking, I bet a lot of neighborhoods would take it.
The mayor's congestion pricing proposal is built around a charge to come into Manhattan below 86th Street. Does it include a parking component?
The initial plan didn't, that I know of, but I don't think it makes much sense to charge people for coming into Manhattan and then letting them drive around hunting for a free parking space.
So you don't think that the congestion pricing proposal as it exists accomplishes the same thing?
I think they're complements. I think that if you are going to have congestion charges, you also ought to do this right-priced curb parking. And the advantage with the right-priced curb parking is you could do it right away. You could do it incrementally. There are neighborhoods that have already asked for it. Say Myrtle Avenue in Brooklyn has asked for it. Columbus Avenue in Manhattan has asked for it. Why say no? Why should the city say no if the neighborhood has said, we want to be the first?
So is this an idea whose time has come for New York? We have a pretty progressive transportation commissioner now and mayor in this respect. In general, do they seem open to you? Did you get a hearing?
Yes, it was one of the greatest interviews I've ever had with the transportation professionals happened today. I think that you're so lucky with your commissioner.
That's Jeanette Sadiq Khan.
That's right. She's a brilliant person, and I think politically savvy, and I think she understands fully all the problems caused by free parking in Manhattan.
We're just about out of time, but we're here at 34th and 5th. Where'd you park on your way in?
Well, naturally, I didn't.
Glad to hear it. Thank you very much, Donald Shoup.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, from animator Simon Toefield, his smash hit on YouTube, Wake Up Cat.
Meow. 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 Meow.
Cat owners, hide your equipment bags. And that's it for tonight's show. We are here Wednesday nights at 7:30 or as a podcast at CUNY.TV. And join me for my daily radio show, The Brian Lehrer Show, weekday mornings at 10 on WNYC. Tomorrow morning, the best new words of 2007. That's on 8:20 a.m. and 93.9 FM, WNYC, tomorrow morning at 10. Have a great night.